everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Intelligence, Part 2 of a 4-part series. If you weren't able to join us for Part 1, please, I want to encourage you to jump back. These are real foundational, and each one builds upon the next. But this is Emotional Intelligence. It is typically a half or full day program that we run with organizations. It includes a workbook and emotional intelligence assessment, but we are offering a no-charge abbreviated version of our emotional intelligence program. We really feel like this is such an important time for us to be raising our emotional intelligence, both personally and professionally. So we are offering a 4-part series. This is part 2, as I mentioned earlier. We certainly hope this is helpful for you, as learning emotional intelligence has been for myself personally, as well as for each of us in our organization. We would love to have your feedback, and if you enjoy the video series, please share it with others. So a brief introduction of myself. My name is Michelle Braden. I'm the president and CEO of MSBCoach. MSBCoach stands for Managing Successful Balance in Business. We are a boutique leadership and executive coaching firm located here in Charlottesville, Virginia. We do national and international work with individuals and their teams. And we really just want to take this opportunity to invest in you. And I'll be the one leading you through part 2 of our 4-part series today. So an overview of what we're going to be focusing on. We'll review the 4 areas of emotional intelligence. We'll talk about today's focus, which is defining self-management. We'll talk about practicing self-management, the benefits of self-management. We'll do a quick review, and we'll talk about your homework last week and how that's going to build upon your homework for this week. Now, last week's session was a little bit longer because we were laying the foundation. I think that one was about 17 or 18 minutes. Today's session is only going to be about 10 minutes total. So, as a quick review, the 4 areas of emotional intelligence are self-awareness, which is what we focused on last week, self-management, which we'll be focusing on this week, social awareness, and relationship management. So for today's focus, let's define self-management. So if you joined us last week, you know I want to invite you to participate to make this as interactive as possible. So take just a moment. You can either pause the screen or just take a moment to jot down, what is your definition of self-management, and what does self-management mean to you? So self-management is the ability to recognize that your internal emotional state does not have to correspond with your behavior. So what I mean by that is I may be feeling really frustrated. I may be feeling really tired. Now, I'm not being false or fake in what I'm doing, but if I've got to do a presentation in front of an audience of people who are anticipating my delivery and have paid for me to be there and are looking forward to learning, I've really got to pull myself up by the bootstraps. I can recognize, I'm not feeling the best today. I may have experienced something emotional that distressed me, but I need to show up and I need to manage my own image and my brand in the way that's most important to me. So my external behavior does not have to correspond with what's going on inside, because I can be intentional to manage that. This is why being able to practice mindfulness and meditation is so important. Next, intentional management of how you want to show up for yourself and others while staying grounded in your values. I like to use the metaphor of a buoy, that our values are so important to us. They are what hold us down. They are what ground us. So when you think of a buoy in the water, the bottom part of that buoy is what holds it down into the water. But the top part of that buoy may move and it may sway as the wind blows, but it's still anchored. So our values are what anchor us. So it's important in practicing self-management for us to recognize, because I adjust my behaviors does not mean that I am not being true and authentic to myself, as long as I am staying anchored in my values in that behavioral adjustment. Next, Self-management is the ability to cope with emotionally stressful situations through managing and regulating our emotions. So part of that means recognizing, so we talked about self-awareness last week, recognizing what are my triggers? Who are my triggers? What sort of people? What sort of behaviors? What are the things that trigger me? And then how might I want to show up differently when someone, to use a metaphor, pokes the bear? When someone trips those triggers, even if they don't do it intentionally, how do I want to manage myself so I show up the way that I am choosing to show up rather than allowing someone else to control my emotions? And last, it's the ability and the use of words to explain how you feel. So rather than just allowing our emotions and our blow up, for us to really take the time, one of my favorite sayings is, when I go slow, I go fast. So for us to be intentional, to slow down, what am I feeling? How can I put this into words? And I made some recommendations in the homework last week for you, Mood Meter and a few other tools that really help to expand our vocabulary of the emotions that we're feeling. So we don't just go from I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm glad, but we can actually expand our emotional word vocabulary, which actually helps us to articulate more effectively how we're feeling when communicating to ourselves and communicating to others in working through our self-management. So practicing self-management requires us to be self-aware. That is an important foundational element. It can be a little bit challenging to manage things if we are not being intentionally aware of what it is we're managing and how we want to manage those behaviors. You know, I've heard people say things like, just take me as I am, here I am, take it or leave it. Well, that's not really managing yourself or managing your brand. That's just casually showing up without being intentional in your life. Practicing self-management requires us to be intentional. It requires us to be open to feedback. What are others experiencing? Even if that wasn't our intention, if that's what they experienced, remember, we can't control anyone else. Well, what adjustments might I want to make or not? Maybe there are times that we don't want to make any adjustments, but for us to take the time to determine if we do want to make adjustments or not by being open to receive that feedback. Next, it requires self-discipline. How will I be disciplined to make adjustments, especially if I've got neurological pathways that are set of how I've responded certain ways for the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and maybe even I got rewarded for those things. These typically go all the way back to our childhood, how we respond in situations. But we do know that we can create new neurological pathways. We can create new habits, new patterns, new ways of responding, but that does require self-discipline, which also requires our own self-control. Pausing, deep breathing. How am I responding? How do I want to respond? What might I want to do differently next time? How will I be controlled to be aware of that next time? Also, self-mastery. You are the master of yourself. Your emotions are not the master of you. Oh, they're strong and they're real, but we can still be the master of our own self. And then practice. Practice doesn't make perfect because you guys, we're never going to be perfect. We are going to make mistakes. We are going to show up sometimes the way we didn't want to. We are going to have an amygdala hijack and be disappointed in our behavior. But that doesn't mean that we stay off the wagon. We just climb right back up and we keep practicing and we own our behavior and we apologize for it and we declare to ourselves what we will do differently next time and to others. And then self-compassion. So I think this goes with, as we're practicing, practice makes permanent, practice doesn't make perfect. So as we're practicing, if we make a mistake, if we don't show up as perfectly as we wanted to be compassionate with ourselves, to try again next time. But then to be self-disciplined, self-controlled, and intentional to show up differently next time. So we're not living into the definition of insanity of doing the same thing and expecting different results. Self-management, therefore, is all about becoming your own leader by training your mental, physical, social, and intellectual faculties in different ways. We can do this. You can do this. So what are the benefits of self-management? What's in it for me? That's important. Being self-controlled really feels good. It's empowering. It helps us to feel stable within our own emotions, but then it also helps those around us to be stable around us. They know what to expect from us. We're not a ticking time bomb. We might not be really, really sweet and warm one day or one part of the day and blowing up the next day, and people don't even expect that to be coming. Likewise, same thing in us. We can feel more comfortable and stable internally. When we are showing up as self-controlled and stable, we very naturally build trust with others. It also helps us to manage our responses in difficult situations. When we're practicing emotional intelligence of self-awareness and self-management, that sure doesn't mean the difficult situations or the difficult people or the ones who trip us up and push our buttons and cross our values aren't going to be there. Those things are always going to be there in life. But we can manage our own response in those situations. It helps us to be more agile. And boy, now more than ever in our personal lives and professional lives, we've got to be flexible and be able to say, okay, this didn't go the way I wanted it to. Let me deep breathe and take a step forward. And you've probably heard me say many times, deep breathe. When we do this program all together, one of the things we do every time we come in from a break is we stand up and we do some activities to get our brain refocused. And one of those on a regular basis is deep breathing. So I encourage you to make that just a regular part of your daily routine because it helps us to be centered, it helps to slow our heart rate down, and it helps us to get oxygen to the brain. Next, when we are self-managed, it helps us to manage our next steps. Okay, I'm really frustrated right now, but how do I want to respond? Okay, I don't like what's happening here. How do I want to respond? Or just the opposite. I really do like what's happening here. How do I want to be intentional to try to make those kind of things happen again? I liked that. I liked the way I showed up. How do I manage my next steps? And how can I take initiative in situations and in relationships to keep them going, to end them, even initiatives at work, to have a voice. Remember, we talked about self-awareness. We talked in the first session, we talked about how emotional intelligence really raises our influence. So that's in our personal lives as well as our professional lives. So it allows us that space with influence to take initiative. And then lastly, when we're practicing all of these things, we really see an increase in our own confidence, but we also see an increase in the confidence others have in us. So in review, we talked about and reviewed the 4 areas of emotional intelligence that we're studying throughout this 4-part series. Today's focus was defining self-management. We looked at how do we practice self-management, what are the benefits to us of self-management. And now we're going to do our check-in of our homework last week and how we will apply that for this week. All right, so our homework, what most stood out to you from your self-awareness observation homework that you did last week? So if you haven't already found those themes and patterns, pause right now. And again, we weren't trying to change anything or make any adjustments last week. We were just trying to be more aware. Next, how can you apply what you have learned today in this series about self-management to your own self-management? So how can you apply what you've learned about yourself in your self-awareness observation to what we've discussed today in your own self-management? Next, what is one area? Now I'm going to pause there and I say one area because if everything's important, then nothing is important. So I really want to invite you and encourage you to hone in just on one area. I'm sure you've got 1,000 other things going on in your life. So choose one area in which you want to show up differently in your life, personally or professionally right now, and jot that area down. Now, how will you apply what you've learned in today's session and even last week's session on self-awareness and self-management to make adjustments so that you are managing yourself and how you show up? Now, we're going to take it even a step further than we did last week. Who will support you? And who will help you to be accountable, not for what they want, but for what you want for yourself? So I'm going to pause there in case you didn't get all that, so you can capture a screenshot of this. And in conclusion, here's my contact information. If you want to reach out, please reach out. Share your feedback. We definitely want to hear from you. And stay tuned, because next week we'll be on part 3, where we're talking about social awareness. Can't wait to see you then. Bye-bye.